So my name is Dawood Dasu, and I'm the forum lead for Fill Finish. And I want to tell you a little bit more about the work we do and how we do it and the benefits that our members get. So the mission of the Fill Finish Forum is to accelerate, bring closer in time the development or realization of world-class filling and packaging operations, which meet patients' needs, future needs and current needs as well. And we do this by providing our members, the biomanufacturers, and its suppliers a platform for sharing their expertise, their knowledge and experiences for the benefit of all. So together, the forum members develop solutions to important common quality and performance challenges, which are arrived at faster, more robustly than they could do on their own. And it's essential, I think, the collaboration, because we know that there's ambiguous and multiple guidances from regulators all over the world. The cost of failure is pretty high. The cost of losing a batch, or the worst case scenario of harming patients because of a problem with the products. The costs are very, very high, and also because it's a highly regulated GMP environment, the cost of making changes and approving or validating those changes is extremely high. So. And also the needs of the patients and stakeholders are changing. Different modalities, different product types. Of course, the needs of sustainability. We do get to reduce our carbon footprints and make with more reduced sustainable materials as well. So dealing with these problems individually, dealing with regulators individually or vendors, it's often not productive. It increases the complexity for biomanufacturers in these sort of interconnected supply chains. So it makes sense to try to get these sort of more rapid performance gains that are really required by working together. We'd love you to find out more and talk to you about membership of the forum, and we'd be delighted if you contact us and tell you more.
Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Hammond. I work at Pfizer. I am a artwork implementation manager within our regulatory business, but I'm also a member of the BioPhorum secondary packaging group. I've come to talk to you today and share some of our experiences about ePI, so electronic product information in the pharma industry, and how that may impact us in the manufacturing space in our packaging operations. So ePI, I wanted to share with you some of the background that the BioPhorum secondary packaging group has worked on. In March 2021, the secondary packaging works team were actively involved, and we published a paper, ePI, electronic product information paper, that particularly was looking at the impact of electronic labeling, or e-labeling as it's referred to, so ePI is e-labeling, and what impact that would have. We covered lots of different topic areas within that paper so that we could get a better understanding, if you like, of our environment as we stand. But the intent of that paper was that we would share our perspectives with other wider partner companies that are working with BioPhorum, but also across industry. We felt it's quite important that we are at a crossroads right now where this type of technology is growing and it should be used more widely. So our paper, we looked at quite a different things in the scope. So the first thing really was, are we facing this as a threat? Is it going to be a challenge to us, or actually is it an opportunity that really should be seized? Where we were in our current position, the types of opportunities that EPI might be able to give us, certainly from a packaging perspective, but where was industry pointing to as a whole? Also around, if we then start looking at that packaging operation, how beneficial might it be to us, but also what is those knock-on effects? And then around how would we access EPI from a packaging perspective? What differences would it make either to the end customer, or what practices would we need to put in place for industry to succeed? Had a look at the regulatory impact, and then where might we have to go in the future, and what work we're going to be doing. So I'll take you through that journey a little bit, and we can have a Q&A session at the end. So is this a challenge or opportunity? So one of the first tasks we looked at was kind of gather the intel of where we are right now. As I'm sure many of you are well aware, the pharmaceutical industry is very heavily regulated. So lots of different regulations from different boards of health or different countries um, makes it quite a complicated picture globally. There isn't one set of standards anywhere, and whilst there are common themes across them, um, they are typically based on a legacy of history that has drawn us to the position where we are now. And a lot of that, when you start talking about the patient labeling perspective or the labeling product information that goes into our products, it has historically, those regulations have been written based around the paper leaflet that will end up into the patient's or health giver's hands. So a lot of our challenges that we have faced is that we have a relatively bureaucratic, if you will, uh, set of regulations that don't really help us to be a very dynamic, forward-moving industry with regards to this kind of technology. As I mentioned before, a lot of the markets have grown over time and developed their own regulation that is specific to their region or to their particular country. It's made us, from an industry perspective, have to be quite diverse and be able to understand and interpret and react to those different regulations. But because they are steeped in the sort of history, the time frame that has built those up, it has meant that it's actually slightly, well, it's not slightly, it is difficult to make some of those changes, and certainly on a global scale, very difficult to make those changes happen. So I put them here as being change resistant. It's not that they're resistant per se, it's just that there is a lot of regulation to move, and something like EPI impacts a lot of different operations. So it's going to be a challenge to keep that whole function moving. One of the other issues we identified also, and this is a changing, very evolving situation, is electronic solutions that may be in marketplaces now aren't there equally across all markets. Even within the European landscape, we have some markets that have a relatively low adoption of mobile phone technology, or if there are plenty of mobile phones, then maybe not the latest smartphones that have full access or quick access to electronic information, and maybe they're older models that are commonly in place that won't do some of the functions that some other markets will have. And then we have other markets within Europe that have a very, very high mobile phone or technology adoption. They have a younger audience, and it's very commonplace to find some of those technical solutions. So one of our challenges is trying to identify a solution that will work across all markets. But that said, we also identified there were plenty of opportunities. So right now, we have never had better technology solutions to things. It's been a very rapidly evolving situation. So it wasn't that long ago that the very first smartphones came out, and nowadays they're probably more powerful than your standard laptop or PC. It's the technology and the speed of pace of change of technology is moving very quickly. There's also a growing appetite for the use of that technology, particularly in our middle and younger generations that are entering the workplace or are now using new tools in the workplace. It's readily being adopted. One of the other opportunities actually is from the COVID pandemic situation. So one of the few upsides of the COVID situation is that where people have had to work from home, we have had all to adapt across the world. So the adoption of the use of new technologies, whether it's ordering your shopping online or being able to order extra deliveries because Christmas has been cancelled, all those kind of things have led people more online and to be more comfortable with the solutions that they come with. QR codes, for example, where we are able to move around, the request to not touch items and not touch menus means that you use QR codes to access items that historically you would have used as a paper format. So it has driven a comfort with that kind of technology to use those phones in a much more accessible way than perhaps was not always so widely spread. One of the other opportunities certainly is that as our businesses become more digitized, so we have already had to build expertise within our businesses that can help build our businesses into the more digital space for the future. And that's great because it means we have expertise within most of our companies, or all of our companies, that are progressing us forwards, progressing us into the later, most recent adopted technologies, and that is driving us force for good. It's helping us rethink in different ways, and that pace of change is happening ever more readily all the time. So that's a real advantage. Again, particularly focused on the EU, but they are happening outside the EU too. There are e-labeling pilots that are going on, and we are seeing 5-6 years ago, there was maybe only 1 or 2 pilots happening in 1 or 2 disparate countries, and now there are multiple pilots running all at the same time, not all offering the same adoption or the same solution or what they're investigating the pilot for, but there is a lot of commonality. So that's a real advantage. There is a real appetite from within industry that it is starting to really focus on what we might be able to do. And then one of the ones in particular is the 4th bullet down here is, we know within Europe there has been a partnership with regulators and with industry, and one of them is the IMI consortium, that is really looking for an industry-wide solution, recognizing that it will be advantageous for both industry and for the regulators and for the payers, and certainly for the end customer, the patients, if there is one solution that could be adopted and rolled out, because it will massively improve the benefit for everybody up and downstream. The quote in the bottom here wasn't anything to do with the work that BioPhorum did, but I came across it the other day, and I think it's absolutely relevant to this topic. If we are able to find a solution to this problem of how do we migrate in towards ePI and move into a future state, we really will have a massive advantage to our customers. And I think that the more we are able to address and face up to and share those challenges, the greater that opportunity to succeed will be. So then we took a look at what is the current state of the environment we're working in. So speaking with some of those health ministries and hearing from the various forums that are coming through, something that was very clear was that, if an ePI solution, if an electronic e-labeling solution is provided, it has to be an improvement on what we already have. And it sounds very obvious, but perhaps it takes a second to really digest what that means. So it's not just a question of replacing a paper leaflet with an electronic version of the same thing, because that actually hasn't really helped the patient a great deal. They still have to search for this information, and it still means from an industry perspective, we still have to almost design the same paper leaflet, we just make an electronic output. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's perhaps not the final solution. And we've got to bear in mind that those improvements have to be from a patient perspective. We have many patients all across the world that are, have a range of underlying health conditions that requires more than one medication. Having more than one medication from more than one provider, from industry provider, means that potentially there are many customers around the world who have to have ideally one solution, so that they only have one portal to go to get all of their information, as opposed to logging onto one company's system to be able to get hold of that particular information and another company's system to get hold of a different product information. That really won't be helping the customer at all either. And that's been recognized and one of the challenges that needs to be addressed. Partly worked on that same topic. In 2019, the European Medicines Agency and the heads of the medicines agencies across Europe and the European Commission worked on a key principles document. And that was particularly concerning the avoidance of multiple solutions, as I've just described, that will actually potentially hinder industry. It adds a much more complex level of industry, much more complex level in our industry to try and solving multiple solutions. But also our patients, as I've just described, would end up having a very difficult solution. They wouldn't have one place to go to. It would become fractious and lack trust in effect. And we know from the EU and Japan and Singapore, there is already differing requirements and more pilots are coming. And whilst they may not all end up with different solutions, time is not really on our side. The environment is evolving very quickly, and we need to come together as a wider forum, a global forum of healthcare providers and industry bodies to try and solve this problem before it becomes too big a spaghetti problem to resolve. In very simple terms, the thought was that if you can simplify the packaging process, very simply, you remove the paper, then you can provide a consistent ePI code and everyone is happy. But actually, it's quite a lot more complex than that, and I'll describe some slides going forward. The real simple idea of just remove the paper has quite a large knock-on effect often. And also, if you remove the paper and you then have to provide the solution electronically elsewhere, you're actually removing a problem from one area, which is the packaging world, the manufacturing world, and you're moving it really upstream into the source content, and that doesn't really have a solution yet either. So it's a double-ended challenge. It's not something that we can just solve from within the manufacturing packaging space. It's something that needs a much broader perspective to look at. There is an element, particularly with a certain subset of products, those that are often packed in glass vials, so it's primarily hospitals and vaccine products, but not solely, where the paper leaflet currently provides an element of protection to the drug product. So we know that if you were to remove the paper leaflet from some of those, it may have the knock-on effect of needing to redesign the packaging to make sure that the vials that are left inside that carton don't become loose or knock into each other. So there's more stability studies effectively need to be run. So the current paper leaflet having an element of protection to it does make the ultimate solution slightly more complicated, because we may have some work to do, certainly in particular parts of our hospital product businesses that may need reworking. The other thought also is there has been many suggestions, and the European Health Authority is one of them, is where they already offer us to provide an electronic solution. That has always been allowed for the last number of years, but it's always in addition to the paper leaflet. And so far, understandably, it's been resisted to go too far down this route, because in effect, all of that burden is on us as the industry to provide two versions of the same thing. And it's not necessarily helping the patients, and it's certainly not helping the environment, because we're doubling up on the work that we have to do. So by having ePI or electronic e-labeling in addition to the paper also doesn't necessarily resolve for our ultimate problem, our ultimate desire of getting something better for patients. This graphic on the bottom here is not meant to be read in any great detail, but the look here is the brighter colors. So the oranges and the reds are where there is already quite an active or an imminent pilots or interaction going on with health authorities, where there are either pilots or there is already legislation that is moving towards ePI. And that's obviously in the markets that you may well expect. There's a few there that you may not. But then as we move into the oranges and certainly in the greys, there is either very little or very unknown activity that is actively going on to talk about ePI, i.e. those markets are still very, very keen to have paper because they don't have an alternative, possibly due to technology reasons, but it's just the accepted. There isn't the bandwidth to be able to address this problem right now. So we haven't gone so far down the road that we're behind, but also we've got to recognize that our environment that we're going to be working in is going to be operating at different timescales across different regions. So we looked at some of the opportunities of ePI in a bit more detail. So obviously the main principle that everyone would expect it to be is that any source of information that is provided electronically would have to be accurate. It would have to be up to date. There can't be any differences there. It should be easily accessible, and that's one of our challenges. And that obviously is everyone's aim. That's regulators' aim, it's patients' aim, it's us in industry as well. We want to provide that level of trust. Several of the other advantages are, if we can move away from having a paper leaflet in a pack, we open up the opportunity to reduce the amount of recalls that are done due to having product that's got out-of-date information. So where variations come through, so your source content is updated, you will have a time period, generally across industry, you have a time period where you have to have that new version implemented in stock. If we have product that hasn't sold quite as quickly as we had expected it to, or it's still sitting in the supply chain elsewhere, now there are occasions where we have to recall that product back into the manufacturing space to have it repacked with the latest information. We all understand why that's necessary, but often the impact of that is if the market was already low on stock and we have to withdraw that product from that marketplace to replenish it with the latest information, we do a repackaging, then ultimately the customer is paying that sacrifice because they don't have the drug product. Even the old leaflet may have been fit for purpose, but from a regulation perspective, we can't use it. We have to do a repackaging. And the idea of moving towards ePI, we hope, in the long run, we would actually reduce the amount of product that falls into that situation that requires a repackaging. So that could be a very positive upside. ePI will probably impact our manufacturing space as well, the production fill finish space, by the likelihood of us being able to use smaller cartons. So if we don't have a carton that has to have a paper leaflet, then of course the carton can be made smaller. And we've already identified that for certain products, it may have to be made smaller to secure those vials or glass contents from rattling around. A smaller carton has the advantage that there are fewer components being put together into that drug packaging, so it's a simplified process. It also means that we're not printing as much, so it has an environmental impact, that's positive. It also means that there are more cartons in a shipper case and more cartons on a pallet, and therefore we're able to avoid the shipping costs of multiple pallets because we can probably fit more on one. So there will be a knock-on effect to the overall cost and environmental impact if we can remove the paper leaflet, not just in terms of physically removing the paper, but the knock-on effect that may have on the packaging size. Some of the concerns that have been raised in the past have often been around access to the electronic information or lack of access to the paper information may have a negative impact to those patients who can't receive the electronic. COVID has provided us with a really good example that has gone across multiple regions around the world, 150 plus markets that now have COVID vaccines. And there has been very little negative feedback around patients or healthcare givers that don't have access to the electronic version of the information when it's been updated on the website. So the use of the code and the way the COVID examples have run so far have been very positive. And one particular study earlier than the COVID pandemic was run by one of the BioPhorum members, and they looked at 13 products across 34 SKUs, 34 lines, and about what impact would moving towards ePI or removing the paper from a package would have. And you can see there that the cost increase to prepare lines, to adjust their processes, to change the QP release profile, all of those things did have a not insignificant cost of change. But on the opposite side, the fact that they didn't have to procure those items, as I mentioned, they can pack more of them on a pallet and therefore the transportation costs were less and the recalls were less. The total saving actually was in favor of removing the paper leaflet. That's probably not a massive surprise. But one thing that was worth noting and had come up in the conversations there were, particularly in the short term, as we move towards removing the paper leaflet, some of those cost savings that we would find within industry would have to be moved upstream within our companies so that we can set the foundations in place to create electronic leaflets in a better format. So moving towards a digital XML type format. However, once that is done and our systems and our companies have a different structure in place, the longer term expectation is the cost of goods should come down. Overall, it should be a simplified process because you're not distributing as much paper and therefore more product is available per pallet and therefore the cost should come down. So what other items might there be that we looked at from a packaging operation perspective? So obviously, one obvious one is how do we make the link between our ePI and the physical drug product? So if we're no longer shipping the product with a paper leaflet inside it, how do we make that connection to the electronic version? A couple of different options here. One was around code, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But the first one was really space. Some of our cartons, particularly those vials that we know that we may have to make the cartons even smaller is we're already at a premium. Space is actually quite tight on some of our products. And it could be conceived that if we have to remove the leaflet and we have to reduce the size of the carton, maybe actually there isn't enough space to put on the extra code to direct people to the electronic version. So maybe removing the paper leaflet in some circumstances may not be beneficial, or it forces us to move to even larger cartons than we currently have. So it's the opposite of one of the benefits that we thought we might have. It would obviously need to be assessed, and it will be a product by product information. But if we were forced to increase the size of the carton, that would increase the pallet volumes. It would possibly force new line qualifications and new shipping studies. So in certain circumstances, those benefits we previously outlined may not actually be totally relevant in all cases. And then there's the other obvious one where we have to update our systems to move towards a new source system that is in the XML format. That will take time and it will take money. And obviously, we've got to make sure that those regulations and SOPs are in place that will suit the Board of Health to give us the authority to move in that direction. So those were some of the other sort of touch points that we had around the impact to packaging operations. But as I alluded to before, right now, there isn't a huge amount of guidance other than we'll allow you to do it, but you can do it in any format you like. So at the moment, there isn't that overarching guidance globally that will help us as the industry or really for the patient. It's just, yes, you can do it, but you can find your own solutions that cover the compliance boundaries that we have. And one of those problems we think may happen if we don't sort of come together and work on this as an industry is we will end up with a propagation of lots of different solutions from lots of different providers. And ultimately that could break down the trust that we would have in the information that is there. In an ideal world, a single solution across all industries would suit both the governments, the patients, but also us in the industry to move forward. So then one of the key elements that we focused on as part of the paper was if we had to make that link to the electronic, how could we do it? And how could we do it in such a way that it would have the least impact on packaging, but the most benefit to the customer? So barcodes are very common. They've always been very prolific in drug product packaging. And often they were requirements of the Board of Health themselves. So it's for pricing and reimbursement or for product identification when it comes into market. That's all fine. There was lots of different codes in place and they were all fine. They were relatively easy to produce and they were all done, generally speaking, as part of the artwork creation process, meaning they're static. They don't change. It's the one code that is consistent for the timescale of that product. That's great, but we are also producing codes now in many markets for serialization. So for the product identification purposes, many regions, including the EU, have set up a serialization program that requires us to put a dynamic code on the pack. That basically means that most of our manufacturing lines across the industry, anywhere in the world that supplies into the EU or supplies into a market that has a serialization mandate, means their lines are already equipped. They already have the capability to print dynamic codes. And that's a real advantage to us. That's something that industry has invested in heavily because of these mandates over the last 4 or 5 years, 10 years even, if you go back to some of the very early mandates. So we have a huge amount of expertise and capability to print electronically already dynamic codes. So on screen here, we have 2 different codes, one of which you will be able to scan with your mobile phone, one of which you won't. So for those who are not so familiar with the 2 different coding types, the one on the left with the big square dots, that is a QR code, a quick reference code. It is a form of data matrix code. It's one of the common forms of data matrix codes, and you'll find them prolifically everywhere these days. So you find them in supermarkets, in magazines, in shop fronts to access menus. And in fact, if you scan this code on your screen right now, you will come across a link, which is a static link, and it will take you off to a page on the BioPhorum website. The other code on screen here is a 2D data matrix. It's one of the data matrix types that is commonly used in serialization, mainly because it contains a lot of information in a very small amount of space, and it doesn't, and it allows it to be dynamic. One of the big problems that we have is that QR codes are able to be read by mobile phones, and therefore most patients who we would like to access our electronic health information, our electronic product information, have mobile phones, or they will be in the not too distant future if they're migrating rapidly towards this type of technology. Whereas most mobile phones don't natively read a 2D code. So even if we were moving towards a place where most of our customers, most of our end users who need the information have a mobile phone device, that device doesn't yet natively read a 2D code. So what we end up with is a situation where we have to have two codes on the pack currently. So we end up having a QR code to read the electronic product information, the e-labeling, and we have a 2D code, like the one on the bottom right-hand side, that is used for the product identification, normally within the supply chain. Having two codes is a problem, or can be perceived as being a problem. So one of the things that BioPhorum and the group of companies did was to talk through what the options might be, and we spoke with the Global Standards Organization, GS1, and they already had a standard that they were developing in place that would cover, or at least do an interim solution for this. And effectively, it was using the digital link standard, and it can be looked up. It's readily available on the Global Standards website. And what it does is it takes a QR code and makes it a little bit more intelligent. Effectively, it transforms what is a static QR code that takes you to a single page. It fills it with a little bit more information that with the right app and resolver, it will allow that resolver to point you to the right information as opposed to just a static page. So it's one step in the right direction. It still kind of enforces you to have two codes, but it's not necessarily the final solution yet. It's a very good solution. As I mentioned before, one of our challenges right now is there isn't a global standard for scanning data matrix technology. Mobile phones have adopted the QR as their favorite choice, and most mobile phones nowadays from almost all manufacturers will scan a QR code. Some of the older models won't, but most of them without an app don't scan a 2D data matrix. So it's not quite there as the ultimate patient solution yet. So we looked at that, and what is the problem? What does that face us with? So two codes on a pack is a problem. We already know, and we already get complaints where that has been used, is that someone in the supply chain who's maybe new and not so familiar will scan the QR code and wonder why they don't get their supply chain information. And a patient might scan the 2D code that's used for supply chain and wonder why they can't access the website or the link that it's supposed to be taking them to. And that can often end up with complaints or errors coming back to this company saying, your code doesn't work. Well, actually it does, they've just scanned the wrong code. So there is that element of confusion. It doesn't necessarily help our end customer. And ultimately, as we said at the beginning, the aim is that we need to provide a good solution for everybody. The other problem with QR codes is they're not dynamic. So, the COVID was a good example, and it really helped us in some cases, but actually in others it didn't. So the quick solution to roll out electronic information to all patients around the world was to use QR codes and direct people to a website. It's only a small downside, but one of the downsides is, they may have to go to the website, which they then have to find their countries or their translations information or their expiry date. So from a customer's end user perspective, whether it's a healthcare professional or the patient, they had more clicks to go through. So it wasn't taking them to the ultimate document. They had to go to a static page, which meant they were having to do more work themselves. Not a massive problem, but it's not the ideal solution. So we looked at the pros and cons of the first column here, which is, could we use a QR code with that digital link standard? Or the second column, could we just move straight to a data matrix? And in really high level terms, so the advantage of using a QR code, but with that extra embedded information using the digital link from GS1, that really added a standard that is already available in patients' hands. So a mobile phone can scan a QR code, even if it has that extra embedded information. It's just an extra string of information. Right now, it won't resolve them to the correct version. It will still take them to the static page. But with the right resolver technology in the background, which GS1 support as part of this digital link solution, is we could resolve that. Knowing the patient is a healthcare provider, we could pass them on to the healthcare information, or knowing the patient has logged into the app as a patient, then it'll take them to the patient information. So we can make some further intelligence from the QR code using the GS1 digital link. That was a good advantage. It's also a stepping stone perhaps to maybe an ultimate solution, and I can allude to what that might be, some of the things that are going on, but it's a really good solution. But the negative side of that is it still means we would have two codes, one for serialization and one for ePI. I've already alluded to the confusion that might be for the end patient having multiple codes, but also that element of version control. So if you imagine a product that a patient would scan the QR code and it takes them to a landing page, if that patient leaflet has been updated, how do we inform the patient that the carton they have does or doesn't relate to the information that they now have on screen that they've scanned? Maybe the information that we've scanned on screen is more up to date, and actually they need the version that was relevant to the carton that they have in their hand. So there is an element there that if we don't get that resolver information right using the digital link, then there is an element of confusion, and it's extra stepping stones, if you like, but it's a good interim. If we move directly and avoid that, and we avoid using QR codes, and we move directly to the 2D code that we already use for serialization, could that work? One of the main advantages of that is the fact that there is only one code on the pack, and it serves multiple purposes. It serves supply chain, product identification. It provides the end user the knowledge of which batch and whether it's expired or not. It would also, in this case, potentially provide the end customer with the right electronic version of the information. But a massive downside we have right now of moving straight to a data matrix is they can't currently natively be scanned off a mobile phone. So either we have to equip all of our patients with a new app, or apps that are relevant across different industries, or a handheld scanner. All of that is just an obstacle that's not yet resolved for. So we kind of looked at that, and the situation we were in 2021, at the beginning of 2021, was actually right now, QR codes really are the only solution, but we can make them much more intelligent. We can use that digital link, and that would be the stepping stone to a future solution that we could find from a global perspective. QR codes do work, they're very good, but they maybe aren't the ultimate solution. And as a result of that, and working on that paper, the BioPhorum group are now quite actively working with GS1, the Global Standards Organization, to both companies go and lobby the mobile phone manufacturers. And we've actually had, inverted commas, some success. We have met with both Google and Apple, the two largest 80% sort of owners of all mobile phones in the world, to lobby them and suggest that they need to start investigating ways that we can natively read 2D codes. We had a strong acknowledgement that was a good idea, but not any idea when that might be adopted. So we're working on that. So last couple of points. So working on the regulatory impacts. So the benefits are well known, and I've covered most of these already. So electronic information, we know, can make sure that the latest updates are readily available much more quickly after approval than the paper version. So that's well known. We know from the COVID examples that updating electronic information on a website via a QR code, albeit not the most perfect solution, it does work, and we can get there consistently within 2 weeks. It's not doing anything clever, it's not using XML, it's just an electronic version of the source information in a PDF, but it is accessible to the client, to our end customers. And we do know from that same experience in COVID, those that we have had to put paper in, it takes, it's quite difficult to change it quicker than 3 months. So we may have multiple electronic versions being posted to the website because there's more up-to-date information, and we are lagging behind in the paper process because it takes at least 3 months to get that done. So obviously we're batching information together, but it's a lagging process in paper. The electronic information via the websites, albeit it's product-specific websites, it's not one trusted source, but they did become a trusted source. we had lots of people directed to them with few complaints that they couldn't get hold of the right information. But what we need to have is a trusted solution that is global. So we need to maintain that up-to-date information and make sure it is current and we can respond to customer complaints through those same electronic portals. And we know that the digital link standard, as I've just described, could be a very good interim solution for us. Even if it's not unified across all regions all at one time, it may be from that map. You can see that different regions will adopt technology at a different time frame. If there was one solution, it would be easier to roll out. But I just wanted to touch also on the EU's IMI's initiatives. There's kind of two halves to it. One half is the Gravitate Health and the other half is the Pharma Ledger. The Gravitate Health is looking at the source content of that ePI and how could it be customized and made into a future benefit, if you like. What's the future proofness of it? And the other part through Pharma Ledger is how could we access an electronic solution that would solve for EPI, but it would also solve for product security and recalls and such, lots of the other problems more than just EPI. And they, through the Pharma Ledger app, they ended up in a similar resolver situation as the GS1's digital link for the QR code, but they have solved it using the data matrix 2D code that we use for serialization. And that's the real advantage here, is it allows us to move back to that one code for all purposes. So we avoid that confusion. The advantage of this particular example from IMI is that it uses blockchain technology. So it has that built-in security that it can link to the trusted source within a industry company's source systems. So we know as that content is updated, it's already pushed out into the end user interface through the app. But it does mean that it's very secure. And it means that we have full control over the recall, the product security, as well as accessing patients into the correct version of the ePI. So it's quite a neat technology. But it's in its infancy. It's in its second year of the phase of this product. It's going to come to an end this year, but they are looking to roll it on within industry because it's been quite successful. But it will mean that our source systems have to move to XML. It will mean that the companies will have to implement blockchain. So it's maybe not a done deal that this is the ultimate solution, but it's a very, very good one. It will take time and it will take money. It does use much more of the blockchain machine learning type information. We have that technology that I alluded to within our companies. We know that that kind of technology is ready to be adopted. It's just quite a big move to be able to change all of our source systems to be able to link to all this information. It's actually a very, very complex project to be able to move. And what we will end up doing is we have a conflict of we can move at the pace of technology, but we also have to move at the speed that legislation allows us to move. And we've got to make sure that's kind of in unison, if you like, across the globe, so that when we create a solution, we actually try to make a global solution out of this rather than something that's very specific for the EU or even just for individual markets. So finally, what's next for us? So the BioPhorum Secondary Packaging Group, we will continue to involve our stakeholders in this, and we'll work quite closely with GS1, and we are now connected with the Pharma Ledger Group. There's something that we believe we have to carry on with. We expect that over time we will have more pilots running, and we will have more agencies, there's two here, that we expect to develop their own guidance, and we don't know yet whether they will start to diverge from what's already in the marketplaces or whether it will be complementary to what's already there. As I mentioned before, time is ticking, and the secondary packaging workstream of BioPhorum would be very happy to offer our product packaging perspective on any of these possible solutions that industry may come, that governments may come up with. And then ultimately the problem we have is the how we implement EPI. We do know already that EPI will come. It's just how do we do it? But we've got to make sure as industry across the globe that we can do it so that it lowers the cost of the patient ultimately. It's simplified, so we have a better approach for our customers to able to access the information in whatever format they need, audio or video or just an electronic file, that it is trusted, and ultimately we can reduce the environmental impact we have, because there are thousands of tons of product information that gets thrown away just because it becomes out of date. In an ideal world, we'd like to be able to reutilize that. So as solutions get developed and adopted by certain leading markets, we can roll that same technology out downstream to those other markets. It means following markets get the advantage of all that learning. It also means that it's a much simpler and quicker solution for patients and governments to be able to roll out. So our recommendation at the end of that paper was that we should be looking to adopt the GS1 standard in the interim term, and to stay together and working for an open approach so that we can find a common solution, ideally globally, that can roll out for ePI. So thank you very much for my time. I appreciate you allowing us to come and talk to you today. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear.